What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. We're at the end of January, which means it's time to rank every movie that I saw this month from worst to best. We're back to doing this as I skipped November and December's list, as it would have just been mostly made up of movies that were from earlier in the year and I was just playing catch up. But hopefully that won't happen again, as I enjoy doing these and I think I should be a little better about keeping up with everything. Knock on wood. So before we begin, let me know in the comments what you thought were the best and worst movies in January. As always, this is just my list and not a definitive ranking. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these ranking videos, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie related content like reviews and rankings on a near daily basis. So today we have 18 movies to talk about. January might be known as a slower month, but there was still plenty to talk about, and actually mostly in a good way, as I did myself a favor and avoided certain noteworthy releases that didn't get such great reviews. Doesn't mean I didn't check out some movies I ultimately didn't like or didn't hear that many good things about going in, but I did not need to waste my time with movies that I just knew I was going to struggle with going in, especially in a theater. So no King's Daughter, no Redeeming Love, no Tiger Rising. I also didn't go out of my way for too many of Netflix's original releases. But on the flip side, that did free me up to check out a few movies that seem to be completely off people's radars. And when we get to those, I am very excited to talk about them. Moving forward, I'll also have these videos timestamped, divided up by the bad movies, the movies I thought were just okay, the good movies, as well as the great movies. I'm not going to do an actual tier list. I know those are quite popular, but I did at least just want to make it clear where the divide was between some of these movies. But let's not waste any more time, and let's get to the list. Kicking things off in the movies I did not like, in last place is American Siege, which reteams Bruce Willis with Cosmic Sin director Edward John Drake, in yet another movie where he mostly sleepwalks through every line of dialogue. On top of that, all of his scenes feel so disconnected from the rest of the movie that it felt like two totally different films were stitched together at times, as he contributed next to nothing here. But as for the main story itself, while it's more coherent, it wasn't much of an improvement over Willis's material, with these cartoonish thieves who mostly shouted all their dialogue at one another for minutes on end, giving us no one to actually root for, except when the movie tries to go into these flashback scenes involving one of the thieves' missing sister that had these wild tonal shifts where it would border on soap opera territory. It was almost impossible to take it seriously, though whether or not anyone actually cared that we did is a different story. At number 17 is The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild, the 6th movie in the Ice Age franchise, and while I haven't seen all of these movies, this is easily the worst of the ones I have seen. For one thing, despite the title implying it's a spin-off, the film mostly acts as just another Ice Age movie, and I'm pretty convinced Buck Wild was just put in the film's title because Simon Pegg was the only returning voice actor from the other movies. But he doesn't even show up till 20 minutes in, and even when we do see him, the primary focus is literally on everyone else who isn't him, which is just a huge waste of Pegg's talents. On top of that, while there are some harmless attempts at family-friendly entertainment, I can even see kids not enjoying this one. It's mostly not funny, and the animation is quite possibly some of the worst I've seen in quite some time. And considering how enjoyable that first movie was, this is a huge fall from grace for the series. At number 16 is The 355. Our first theatrical release of the year is unfortunately a dud. It's not quite as bad as I thought it would be, but it's still got its problems. This wastes and misuses the talents of so many great actors, and it's clear it ultimately doesn't know what it wants to be. It wants you to take it seriously, but it glosses over every specific detail regarding names, places, and events in service of fight scenes that, while not poorly done, aren't exactly anything memorable either. So this is neither a compelling nail-biter, nor is it a fun thrill ride, and because it can't fully commit to a particular style, it fails at whatever it was looking to go for. Number 15 is Sex Appeal, an attempt at reviving the R-rated sex comedy that unfortunately falls flat on its face. Now, this is another one that's a little better than I thought it was going to be, as it isn't mean-spirited, and it does display the occasional warmth, including an ending I certainly wasn't expecting. However, it also embodies many of the worst elements of these sex comedies, with non-stop awkward tangents and crude jokes that are simply made up of characters rattling off different names for body parts and sex positions. On top of the fact that our lead character is presented as having no people skills in a way that's so exaggerated, it strains credibility. While you can do much worse than this, it's still really not a good time. At number 14 is The Free Fall, a psychological horror movie where a woman questions her sanity as well as the motives of her husband. It had some unique visual moments, including hallucinations, and the performances by both Andrea Londo and Shawn Ashmore were solid. However, the way the film presents the mystery and conflict, because of how on the nose its score was and because of the off-putting ways in which the characters would constantly interact, it's presented in a way where we know there's clearly going to be this big reveal coming and Ashmore's character isn't who he says he is, and it's just a matter of when we get this reveal, which is presented in this oddly underwhelming moment. It seemed like everyone involved was legitimately trying, and for some this may work as a result. But for me, I found it way too predictable and had a hard time being invested in these characters. At number 13 is The Wasteland, which is more of a meh movie. The first new release I saw this year certainly is far from the worst, but honestly I still found it to be a mixed bag. On one hand, the acting is excellent, while the direction, cinematography, sound mixing, and its eerie score really enhance the psychological drama. So there is a great sense of heartbreak as this unseen force causes our characters to lose their minds. But on the other hand, when it comes down to it, it still felt like a generic horror movie that especially follows many of the same dramatic beats as these other possession films. It's definitely more well made than what we could have got, but there was an extra layer of depth clearly missing to make it feel more memorable, and in the end, it felt like just a missed opportunity. At number 12, bringing us into the OK tier, is Munich, The Edge of War, a political thriller documenting a fictional story set against the real events leading up to World War II. It's a very well acted film with solid performances by both George McKay and Jeremy Irons, and it's a mostly dialogue-driven film with a number of conversations feeling quite gripping. However, it wasn't always consistent in its thrills. It has an overall restrained approach that undercuts any sort of urgency it's meant to have, and with its reliance on name-dropping and event references, it doesn't feel all too accessible to anyone who isn't a history buff or into these sort of movies to begin with. Besides going on for a bit too long, it doesn't really do anything egregious. It's just one of those films that's fine enough, but simply just not for me. At number 11 is King Car, a bizarre movie that takes a surrealist sci-fi setup about a talking car and mixes it with some darkly comedic undertones while infusing some light political allegory. It's going to get some comparisons to last year's Titane, which also had a sentient car, and both films are out there, but to be clear, it's for two totally different reasons. I'd say this film was fun as we get introduced to all these quirky characters, as well as due to the car having this odd, seductive voice that got a few laughs out of me, and I liked how it tried to infuse this message about class and social tensions, but while I enjoyed it enough, I wound up not being able to love it, as the film also wandered a bit aimlessly quite a few times. Plus, whatever message it was trying to bring up ultimately didn't go anywhere. It tried to make itself feel grander in scale, but it came up falling short. Still, there are so many cool, unique things it does with its absolutely weird premise that I still thought it was worth the watch. Bringing us into the top 10 is Hotel Transylvania Transformania, which is the final film in the series that basically does more of the same as its predecessors, which can be for better or worse. In terms of its jokes, it works, as it relies a lot once more on the banter among all these fun, quirky monsters. But as far as its story, it begins to feel a bit stale. Not that we go to these movies for anything too complex, but it's basically just another take on Drac scheming his way out of a situation due to his paranoia, which has now been the plotline of 3 of these 4 movies, and it makes it feel by the numbers in terms of its dramatic beats. It's entertaining enough, the charm's still there, and it's actually an improvement over the 3rd movie, but it's still not the strongest note this series could have ended on. At number 9 is See For Me, a somewhat gimmicky home invasion thriller that's light on character development, but knows how to go in on the fun, which is both a good and bad thing. It gets straight to the point and is mostly an event-driven film, with a lot of the conflict just stemming from our blind protagonist and the See For Me operator dealing with this group of home invaders, and there are enough scenarios that have a little bit of self-awareness that it makes this fun. The only issue is, I think we needed just a bit more from our protagonist Sophie in terms of likability. While it doesn't need to be overly complex, part of the problem is Sophie spends a good part of the movie doing nothing but lashing out at others and dismissing everyone. And while there's a reason behind that, from a writing standpoint, it doesn't make for a great lead character. Still, all the performances, as well as the mostly consistent sense of fun, overcome its flaws and make this a solid enough watch. At number 8 is The Last Thing Mary Saw, a Shudder original that mixes supernatural elements with a gothic character drama about forbidden love. While this does share many similar qualities with Shudder's other slow-burning, small-scale, moody horror movies, it's a bit richer thematically. The dreamlike cinematography and creepy imagery is used as a way of exacerbating the stress that our 2 leads endure. Although I wouldn't say all of that comes comes together in the most cohesive way. Still, when you get down to the film's emotional core, it works quite well, with Stephanie Scott and Isabel Fuhrman giving two great performances, along with Rory Culkin in what's essentially an extended cameo. The pacing will cause it to not be for everyone, but you may just get something out of it if you're in the right mode. At number 7, bringing us into the good tier, is An Ideal Host, an Australian horror comedy about a dinner party gone wrong, which turned out to be a fairly pleasant experience. It's a fast-paced, quirky film that starts off like you're in for one movie before completely pulling the rug out from under you to give you something completely different. Admittedly though, that's also its best and worst quality. It does feel like two movies stitched together, each of which are a lot of fun in their own right, but it also causes the film to introduce a few storylines that it looks like it's about to set up, and then it abandons them once we hit this particular twist. But it remains strong in terms of its pacing and its laughs, so it's an odd mix where it's consistent in some areas, yet inconsistent in others. For some, that might leave them a little frustrated, but I still thought the good outweighed the bad, even with its issues. At number 6 is A Hero, the latest film from award-winning director Oscar Ferrari that sees misfortune after misfortune befall this one man, with the film acting as an exercise in how much of it you can handle. The film sees the effects of what one white lie can do and how much it can spiral out of control, with our protagonist having to continuously backtrack after he becomes a sensation and everyone finds holes in his seemingly heroic story. Though it often plays things in a fairly restrained, understated manner, so it might lead to some emotional disconnect for those who like big dramatic moments in their movies. But I'll commend this film because despite having a premise that could have played like a mindless comedy of errors, there's a lot more emotion to it, as it touches upon themes about morality and integrity, and despite a bit of a rinse and repeat formula, it still manages to pack quite a punch. At number 5 is Photocopier, which took home the top prize at the Indonesian Film Festival, which is Indonesia's equivalent to the Oscars. Although, despite premiering on Netflix, it seems to have already slipped right under the radar, which is a shame. This is essentially a hard-boiled detective drama, except if the detective was a college student, and with that comes a mix of thrills and social commentary regarding issues such as gaslighting, abuse, mental health, and emotional repression. Despite its heavy subject matter, it's really an engrossing whodunit, as our lead character needs to find out who leaked these photos of her online, as she has to salvage her reputation, and it leads to a dense, rich narrative as she has to confront various individuals within her community. While I think its bold ambition can sometimes cause it to bite off a bit more than it can chew, with a runtime that goes on for definitely a bit too long, it's still a meaningful, emotionally satisfying experience that deserves more attention than it's currently getting. Bringing us into the great tier, at number 4 is Scream, or Scream 5, the first film in the franchise not directed by Wes Craven. While a bit more serious than what we're used to in a Scream movie, that doesn't mean it's no longer fun, as it's still an effective blend of a whodunit with dark comedy, all while satirizing the latest of quote-unquote requels or reboot/sequels. While longtime characters Sydney, Dewey, and Gale take on more supporting roles, they're still fun to see when they do show up, while a few of our lead characters are just as compelling, primarily Sam and Tara, played by Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, who, spoiler alert, you'll see again later on this list. Despite no longer being helmed by Craven, I do think this fit very smoothly into the universe of the other 4 films. Though, that also being said, despite its own rebranding as a requel, I think it's mainly something that longtime fans will enjoy and not win over anyone who wasn't a fan of the first 4 movies. But that being said, it's still a fun time, and if you are in that fan base, you won't be disappointed. At number 3 is Belle, a sci-fi fantasy anime that may be best described as Beauty and the Beast meets The Matrix. Though despite that elevator pitch, the film is definitely much more than that. While at first it takes some time to get off the ground, the film eventually wraps you up in a deeply profound story that addresses topics like processing grief and trauma, and it all does so in some truly visually stunning sequences as we become immersed in this wonderful virtual world that I wish we spent more time with. I'd say it's one of those films that ends in a much better spot than it began, as one of its storylines isn't quite as emotionally impactful from the start, but once the pieces of the puzzle start lining up, it had me hooked. This is a wonderful, visually stunning movie, and even if you're not big into anime, you should still give this a shot. Our runner-up is The Fallout, a film about trauma in the wake of a horrible tragedy. But it's ultimately not the movie you think it's going to be. It's definitely dark and emotional, but it's also a film that's about how our grief and how our pain doesn't define us, and it sees our characters actively work on trying to get back to who they were in a surprisingly more positive tone than I was expecting, while never once downplaying the trauma they experience or oversimplifying its message. Jenna Ortega is the heart and soul of this movie, clearly off to a great start this year between this and Scream, while Maddie Ziegler also gives an exceptional performance as well. I went to this expecting a totally different movie, to be quite honest, and I gotta say, I was pleasantly surprised by what we got, as it is such a beautiful, well-crafted film. But in first place is Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, which I'd even go so far to say is excellent. It's a film that was nowhere on my radar, but it's one that I completely fell in love with. I absolutely love small-scale movies that make the most out of its limited cast and setting, but not only does this movie make the most out of it, it turns what could have easily been a gimmick into something totally high concept, and I was just hooked. It's not the most emotional movie out there, which I think will ultimately be the big strike against it for some people, but don't mistake that for being hollow or one-dimensional. It still tackles some interesting topics like free will and predestination in a meaningful enough way. It's just that it also does so through a lot of giddy optimism and wonder and awe. But honestly, I loved every minute of it. These are characters I couldn't get enough of and wanted to spend more time with, and we see them wrapped up in this scenario that's so unbelievably trippy. But what's amazing is how it also managed to take its more out there plot points and still make them feel completely digestible so that you still have a lot of fun with it. It's a refreshingly original spin on time travel, and it comes in as my #1 movie in January. But let me know, what were your favorite movies in January? Did you agree with this list at all? Did you disagree with it? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.